Started. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Dr. Josh Eyer, and this is the new version of Let's Talk. We were doing weekly webinars for a while, and now we've jumped to doing monthly, and still inviting great experts on to share with us their knowledge about different things. And today we are going to be speaking about vigilant parenting. And Bobby, you got to forward the slides for me. With Dr. Bobby Laird, and I'm Dr. Josh Eyer. I'm an assistant professor in the Capstone College of Nursing. I do research in a number of different areas, and my training is in clinical health psychology. And I have with me today Dr. Bobby Laird, who is the professor and chair in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies in the College of Human Environmental Sciences here at the University of Alabama. He does a lot of research around parenting and adolescence, and you can see some there contexts in which children and adolescents develop social and behavioral competencies with an emphasis on parent-child and peer relationships, and adolescents who allow themselves to be parented, which I think is just an awesome modern approach to thinking about parenting. Ph.D. from Auburn University, and then he came upstate a bit to us and has been here a while, I think. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to him. Bobby, I'm looking forward to your talk today.
Okay, thanks, Josh. So vigilant parenting is a relatively new idea in the parenting research. There's a group of researchers in Israel who developed this, and it's just starting to kind of be recognized throughout the United States. But a lot of what's going on right now in the parenting research world is blended into this view and this approach very nicely. So I think it's a good thing to be sharing with people.
Before you get started on that, I'll interject. As y'all are listening to this, sorry, my neighbor's dogs are going crazy. As y'all are listening to this, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and we'll either save them for later or answer them as we go, depending on how the talk is going. But definitely be thinking about them, because we're going to have time at the end for a question and answer, a fair amount of time at the end. So I'll be thinking of questions too, but you all come up with some to ask as we go. All right, Bobby, back to you. Thanks.
Sure. So most parenting research is framed around the question of what makes a good parent. Diana Baumrein in the late 60s and early 70s described different parenting styles. Most people have heard of them by now. Authoritative parenting is the good style, and authoritarian parenting is the bad style. Authoritative parents, basically they're warm and loving to their kids, but yet they have expectations and standards for their kids. And most of my career, the 30 years or so that I've been doing research on parenting, what we've been doing is rediscovering the same thing over and over again with lots of different labels and lots of different ways to think about things. The challenge is figuring out, what does an authoritative parent do on a day-to-day basis to carry out that general style? And so I think vigilant parenting gives us a way to think about that more specifically, about what should you do today as a parent? So vigilant care is kind of modeled on the way most people naturally parent their really young children. So if you've got toddlers around, young preschool age kids, generally the way people interact with them, because we have other stuff going on in their lives, is as long as they're kind of quiet and self-entertained, we tend to leave them alone. But we kind of keep our eyes and ears open. And so when they tell us that they need us, or that there's something that we're concerned about, then we go in and help them. That's a pretty effective model. But we don't tend to kind of generalize that as kids get older. And so we kind of think about, what did you do with your really young children? If you think about a kid on the playground, the parent's sitting there talking, hanging out with another parent, just kind of keeping an eye on their child, but then maybe they start to do something that's a little bit challenging for them, or venture off someplace that isn't quite as safe. Then the parent kind of takes the step to go make a correction at that point. That's kind of the general model. So vigilant care has three main functions. The parent is a secure base for the child to explore from. Again, thinking about the parent on the playground, sitting on the bench, You're there, kid can go off, but they can always come back to you. So that's the safe haven function, the child being able to come back to the safety of the parent. And then particularly as we get to talking about older children and teenagers, the anchoring function, or defining acceptable boundaries for your children. Now, parents do that with younger kids as well, but the boundaries are a little different. It might be how far away you can go, whether you can go across the street or something like that. But for teenagers, the boundaries start to become kind of what lifestyle choices are acceptable and permitted and that kind of thing. And again, what's common here is this theme of the child's safety is what is guiding the parents' decisions. And well, you'll see that reappears in another place, importantly as well. So the idea behind this model of parenting is that the functional element, or what matters, is the parent's presence in the child's life. It's not that the parent is trying to control the child or direct the child, but the parent is trying to have a presence in the child's life, both in a literal sense of being present in their life, but also in the sense of maintaining that presence when they're not physically present. So being in the kid's head all the time, so to speak. So the idea of your teenagers, doing something with their friends, and their friends say, hey, let's go buy a pack of cigarettes or something like that. And then you want kind of the little parent version of Jiminy Cricket to pop up on the kid's shoulder and go, yeah, that's probably not such a good idea. And the idea here is that we want to be able to shift the child from the parent caring for them to being able to care for themselves. And one mechanism or one way to do that is to have kind of that parent presence around. So that's why I picked this picture of kind of the parents in the background. They're disappearing, but they're still part of their child's life. So vigilant care is framed kind of around these 3 levels of vigilance. Now, my worldview is that the world doesn't fall into categories, that most things are along a continuum. So I've kind of created an image here where you can think about these 3 levels, but they're also gradients in many ways. So we've got open attention, focused attention, and protective action. And I'll kind of walk you through what each of those would be like. Now, one of the issues here is that parents should move up and down these 3 levels depending on the safety needs of their children. So when everything's going well and you don't have any specific concerns, you should be at open attention. When something kind of alerts you, you move to focused attention. If you find out, like, I really need to go in and intervene here and try to help my child in a very specific way, then that's protective action. And the idea is that as the parent's concern increases, the autonomy that the parent's granting the child should decrease. So if you're at the lowest level, you don't really have any concerns, then your child would reasonably have a lot of freedom. They're doing a good job of making their own decisions, and letting them continue to do that is a good thing. But when parents become really concerned about something, it makes sense to kind of restrict their child's decisions. It's that point when the parents' kind of autonomy becomes more important. So the level of open attention, that should be, for most people, that should be your default everyday kind of interactions with your child. And the idea here is that you want to establish a good relationship. And again, particularly as children get older, you want to show high levels of trust and high levels of autonomy to the child. And this idea of non-intrusive caring interest in the child means, like, just genuinely be interested in your child's life and the things that are going on in their life. The questions that you ask your child about what's going on and about their friends and what they're doing at school and whatnot, those should be based on the same kinds of questions you would ask anybody else that you were interacting with. Interesting questions based upon kind of things that they're sharing with you. The inquisitive kinds of questions are, when we're asking like with suspicion, those kinds of things, that should be saved for when you have specific concerns, not just kind of regular everyday conversation. Now, vigilant parenting is also incorporates this idea of the child in the community, or the idea about it takes a village to raise a child kind of way of thinking. So part of what Omer and his colleagues recommend in Open Attention is that you also interact with your child's friends and the friends of your child's parents. So you want to create that broader community so that everybody knows each other and has some familiarity. In the best case scenario, you're just going to be friends with those people and be able to have conversations with your child's friends. But if you need something and you need help from those people, you've also established those relationships where you could reach out that way. So use one example that these folks use in their writing is the idea when your child has friends over to visit or kind of hang out at their house, that the parents should interact with those other children just like you would interact with anybody else in your home and talk to them. Now they recognize that a lot of times, and my son's the same way. When I talk to his friends at my house, he gives me a look like, "What are you doing talking to my friends?" But it's my house, and if you're a guest in my house, it makes an appropriate sense for me to tell you hello. And most of his friends, they're happy to talk to us. Again, the idea here is that you're also kind of maintaining the role of parent. You're not acting exclusively as your child's friend. That there's a line in there someplace. It's probably different. It's probably a moving line. It varies from conversation to conversation topic where that occurs. But it's important to stay on the parent side of that line. And then ultimately, this open attention is providing you an opportunity to notice any kind of warning signs or any kind of troubles. Is there something going on in your child's life that's concerning? Are they not doing as well in school as you might hope, or are they kind of involved with some kids that you're a little bit concerned about, or maybe they're spending too much time locked in their room right now playing video games, and whatever it is, then it gives you the opportunity to kind of move into this next level. So in open attention, a couple of things to think about. One is they talk about in this research, listening and reacting is two different stages of dealing with a problem. Because one of the underlying things is we want children to share stuff with us. Growing up as a kid in the 80s, I used to see these public service announcements in the middle of my cartoons, for parents saying, the more you know about what's going on in the kids' lives, the better. That seems to be very true. And part of the reason we know that we've learned that part of the reason parents know what's going on in their kids' lives is because their kids are willing to tell them what's going on. And so if you react really harshly or overreact to something that your child tells you, they may be sensitive and not tell you about things in the future. And so being able to think about what your kid's telling you, and maybe cycle back around to it if there's something that troubles you, cycle back around to it a little bit later. Maybe not shut it down immediately in that conversation. It's kind of what this idea about listening and reacting being two separate pieces. So open dialogue, that's the goal here, being able to talk back and forth with your child. But then your reaction, if your kid's telling you something that really bothers you, that it is appropriate and okay. You should, if that's grounded in the values and the things you're telling your children, then it is okay to talk about that and to bring it up. You shouldn't stop yourself from doing that. But you might want to be a little bit more strategic about how you go about bringing that up, and how, whether, one of the things I recommend is bring it up in the next conversation. Let that conversation kind of play out. And that's this idea of striking while the iron is cold. Basically, that if you kind of have rules in your house that you want to convey to your children, the best way to do that is not in the midst of one of those situations, but outside of of a time where the student, where the child is engaging in that. So, for example, if you want to talk, if you have a teenager and you want to talk about whether you think it's okay or not okay for kids to drink alcohol, and at what ages that would be appropriate for your son or daughter to do. It's probably best to do that not right before they walk out the door with their friends, but some other time where that's really not on anybody's mind. Kind of like that's where the iron is cold idea is, like, get it out of the emotional context and talk about it in that way. But again, the whole goal here is just to kind of establish that presence, and by talking about things that make you uncomfortable as a parent, but that you're worried about for your child, you put yourself in their head when they think about those things. So it's uncomfortable for us adults to talk about sex with our children, for example. But when we talk about sex with our kids, that makes a connection between mom and dad and sex, which establishes a presence, as scary as it sounds. That's the broader goal. Okay, so the second kind of step here is focused attention. So a parent moves into focused attention when we see something that is concerning or is a warning sign. Focused attention should be a transitional step, a find out more step. So, your son or daughter comes home one day and maybe they smell a little bit like smoke. So you're concerned, you're like, well, okay, maybe this is something that I need to pay attention to. So maybe paying closer attention to when they come in the house, kind of being around to check that out. If they have their own car, maybe coming up with a reason to go for a ride in their car, to see if the kind of information gathering here. So you're paying closer attention to their activities, you're tracking their behavior and activities a little bit more closely. Another part of this focused attention aspect is clarifying and reasserting the rules. Now, I think one of the things that I like about this vigilant parenting work is that it's pretty realistic in understanding how things work in families. And so, if we might have a particular rule, let's say, your child is supposed to be, goes to bed at 10 o'clock, let's say. Well, over time that rule tends to wax and wane a bit. And so, it might be creeping up till 12 at some point, and you realize, oh yeah, we had this and we kind of need to reestablish it. So the focused attention is one of those times where you're like, okay, we might not have talked about this at all, but remember, here's what we expect. And that also, if there is something going on in your child's life that he or she may be doing that you don't want them to do, just kind of refreshing that presence. Again, bringing back that up and going, oh, that kind of gives them a sign that I'm onto this. There's something going on here that I'm paying attention to. And again, we're going back to the safety of the child. This work is grounding kind of what makes parenting legitimate, or what makes the actions of a parent legitimate. And one of the most legitimate places that you can work from a parent is the safety of your child. So being able to explain why your rules or why your expectations make the world safer for your child, or that they're grounded in safety, is helpful in that respect. So part of what you're doing during this focused attention stage is you're increasing presence. You're paying a little bit more attention. You're kind of reinforcing those rules, bringing them back up, and that might be enough. If your child's kind of trending toward exploring an area, just kind of like, okay, my parents are paying attention, might be enough to kind of redirect their behavior. So pitfalls in this focused attention stage: spying. So one of the things that I do research on is kind of teenage privacy and what they expect their private lives to be like, and where the boundaries are for parents and things like that. It's a slippery area because mostly we define privacy as when our expectations of privacy are violated. So everybody has different expectations. So whether something's a privacy violation or not for you depends on where your expectations are. But in your family, there's probably kind of normative levels of expectations based upon your previous interactions with one another. And so even if you've never said, your room is private, I'm not going to go in there. If you don't go in your child's room very often as a parent, you've given them that expectation. So suddenly being concerned and saying, well, I'm a parent, I can go in your room anytime I want to. That is a legitimate experience from the child's point of view as you're violating their privacy. Now, I'm not saying there's not times where that would be appropriate, but just on your own deciding, well, now I need to go do something that I hadn't done before. That's one of those tricky areas where you're at least going to get likely to get blowback from the child. But when you spy on your child or kind of go pry into their private sphere, your legitimacy as a parent is kind of undermined because you've done something. You've made two wrongs. And at that point, two wrongs don't make a right kind of thinking. Or you find something that you don't want the child to know that you spied on them. So then you're kind of stuck with this inadmissible evidence kind of perspective, where you know something, but you don't really want to say it out loud or kind of acknowledge it, and that kind of puts you into a bind. So the better way to do it is to tell your child what your concerns are. Again, you want to establish presence. You don't want to catch them doing something wrong. You want to stop them from doing something wrong in the future. So reinforcing, I'm worried about you. I smelled smoke on you the other night when you came home, so I'm a little concerned that maybe you and your friends are experimenting with cigarettes, and we talked about that. I don't think that's a good idea. That reinforces parent presence, and then that if you need to do something more, then you kind of set up your justification and your legitimacy there. Okay, so if you go through, what's the name of that one again? Go through focused attention again, and you find out, well, there is something going on that you're concerned about, something you feel a need to intervene with a little bit more closely. Then, as a parent, you can move to the stage of protective action. So in this protective action stage, you validated your concerns. You found support for your initial concerns in some way, and you've decided that you're committed to taking action at some point. And it's really important to not begin taking action until you've really thought about it and are committed to doing it. Now, again, this is we're talking about this is scalable. So we're not talking about your child's about to climb up to the top step of a slide on the playground and they're 18 months old. No, just run over there and grab it. But with a teenager, you might want to, if it's a big issue like smoking or drinking or something like that, you might want to think about what your plan is, rather than just kind of making it up on the fly or reacting in a heated argument with your child. So the idea is this protective action stage is combined, is enacted through this mechanism called nonviolent resistant parenting. And I'll share some links with you where that, find out more about that at the end. But the idea here is that the parents communicate their concerns and expectations without trying to control or force or coerce their child in some kind of way. And the idea is that we can create immediate compliance with control or force, but that's not the goal. The goal is for your child to comply with your expectations and your rules when you're not physically present. So when you don't have the ability to coerce them. So again, it's all about kind of that presence and that internalization. And so instead, the idea is that you request that your child commit to complying. So again, if it's the smoking thing, I would like you to stop smoking. Will you commit to stopping smoking? And then the idea is that you keep that pressure up, that presence becomes relatively constant, at least in the child's mind. You don't want to constantly nag them, but you want to kind of maintain that high level of presence. Again, works best when it's grounded in legitimate parental authority. So again, safety is one of those legitimate areas. Another legitimate area is that it is the parent's home. And you have, as a parent, you have appropriate authority to determine what is acceptable or unacceptable behavior in your home. The weak areas are where parents try to impose rules but don't have very much legitimacy, at least viewed from the child's perspective. Parents tend to think they have legitimacy everywhere, but we're really thinking about legitimacy from the perspective of the child. When parents try to make decisions about the child's friendships, who the child can or cannot be friends with, that's an area where parent legitimacy is really on shaky ground. It helps if you can frame it in terms of safety. Certain things that you're not allowed to do with particular children is a safer argument than you can't be friends with this child. Or personal decisions. The tricky part is adolescents tend to define personal decisions much more broadly than parents do. But the classic examples here, going back again to the 70s, the hair length. What's an acceptable hair length for a parent versus what is that something that the child can make their own decisions on. Now, the recognition is that these stages of parental action are going to be met with resistance most of the time. But by kind of setting up the expectations, communicating your desire, and then backing off and giving the adolescent or the child the space to comply, it's less embarrassing for them. They're less likely to feel like they have to push back to save face or to establish their own kind of autonomy. Kind of giving them the choice to comply that allows them to feel like I'm doing it because I want to do it, which seems to be more effective. So again, this sounds very kind of like hands off and like, how's that ever going to work? But there's a systematic way to go about doing this that actually makes it fairly powerful. And the idea here is that it's the calm, persistent messaging and presence on the part of the parent that has the effect. So, they talk about strength as a parent as being able to persist without being pulled into provocation or shows of force. So I'm the parent, I have the legitimate authority, and this is what I expect of you. And we're not going to fight about it. I'm not going to have to coerce you into doing it, but this is the behavior that I expect you to do to comply. Kind of the idea. Now, you have to be able to withstand certain kind of responses and protests. And so part of being able to withstand those protests is being decisive, knowing that I'm really committed to this. And so, if you say that you're really committed to, your child going to bed at 10 o'clock, then they're going to start negotiating, right? 10:15, how about 10:25, 10:30? Well, it's very helpful to know what your boundaries are from the beginning and to kind of, be firm and justified in why that is the case. If you want your child, for example, to go to bed earlier, but you're not particularly defined by a particular time frame, then express it that way and give them the room to negotiate here's my goal is for you to go to bed earlier. What's early to you? What works for you? In that case, you don't have a specific goal, but so there is room to negotiate. Other times you might be very decisive and there's not room to negotiate. But if it's helpful to have thought that through on the front end. Not always possible, but helpful. And this protective action stage, particularly when it's something significant and threatening, pulling in supporters from outside your immediate family can be very helpful. So supporters could be members of your extended family, family friends, even the child's friends in some cases can be brought in as important supporters. And they're there to support both you and the child. So sometimes that family member, maybe an aunt or uncle, sending the child a text message or something saying, I understand, here's something's going on in your life and your mom or dad are kind of struggling at the moment. Having an opportunity to be able, for your son or daughter to be able to vent out to somebody else who understands what's going on and is going to be supportive of the parent's decision can be very useful and helpful. Sometimes the supporter is reaching out to your child's friends. Sometimes their friends know that things are going on that are making them uncomfortable as well. And again, some of the resources at the end give a lot of specific examples of these strategies in practice. But again, the expectation on the part of the parent should be that this is going to be a battle. And this is not going to be a one and done conversation. The child is likely to protest in a variety of ways, and that oftentimes it's going to get worse. Their behavior is going to get worse, or the pushback's going to get worse before it gets better. And the goal, again, is to be persistent, not to be forceful and get it done quickly, but to be kind of that soft presence, that soft pressure that gradually gets the behavior under control. And one of the little quotes that's used with this program quite a lot is the idea you don't have to win, only to persist. So you don't have to win the battle today, you just have to stay firm and just kind of define that line for your child and your expectation for their behavior. Okay, so the idea here is that parents are moving up and down, kind of zooming in and out depending on the needs of their child. The reality is that as a parent, I have 2 kids. I might be doing this in lots of different ways simultaneously, right? So it might be, are there kind of ongoing school struggles that are kind of always a background presence where you're kind of moving in and out in that respect. But then there's like the 2-minute version, right? So I hear my kids and they're fighting about something. Like, okay, so I'm kind of popped up to that. Like, I need to pay a little bit of attention to it because I don't want them to hurt each other too badly. But I don't necessarily want to go intervene. But there might be a point where it reaches that. Huh? That's not going to be a long drawn out, hopefully, a long drawn out experience. So we can be moving up and down in all different kinds of time scales too. But the idea is that when we're moving up, when we're moving from that day-to-day green level to we're a little bit concerned and we're going to need to intervene, that our movement should be very intentional and deliberate. We can move very quickly if needed, but it should also be I realize that I'm doing this, that I'm doing it because I need to, not because my kid just triggered me in some kind of way and so I'm going to react in a really harsh way because I'm in a bad mood or something like that. We all do that from time to time, but that kind of erodes some of that legitimacy in this case. And it's more likely to make us say things that we're not really going to be firm on if we get some pushback. But we also should be intentional when we back down too. So going back to the example of kind of smelling smoke on a child, if it turns out they were hanging out at a friend's house and a parent was smoking and they were just happened to be sitting next to them for a while, they've got a good explanation for what's going on. You pay a little bit more attention a few times. You don't see anything going on there, then you should go back down. You have to go back down to that everyday level. I think one of the challenges as a parent is we increase our level of vigilance because of a particular concern, and then that becomes our new norm. We kind of get stuck there instead of kind of remembering to back off again. And I think that's particularly important if you've got to go all the way up to the top to the vigilant intervention kind of level. That it is important to scale back down, and again, because we can be working in different domains of life simultaneously. It could be very well that you've had a very intense conversation with your son or daughter about school or some other topic, and then 15 minutes later you're sitting there eating dinner. And so how do you kind of leave that kind of intervention model of parent, leave that in the room at the end of that conversation, and then move back down to the everyday attentive interested parent when you get to dinner time. Those are particularly challenged. And one of the ways that this model of parenting says that we do that is by expressing appreciation for each other. And so even in the context of so for example, in one of the studies that or one of the papers that Hammer writes, they talk about parents who are having really significant problems with one of their grown children really who won't move out of the house, and so they're struggling to get the kid to kind of take some responsibility for their life and move out of the house. And they talk about how after one of these really intense, drawn-out conversations, the mom cooked the son's favorite dinner that night, and that's kind of a repair saying, we still care about you, we still love you, and kind of that kind of message. So that's one of those ways you can think about kind of going back and forth. And I think, and I don't know if this is how widespread this is, but I think I attribute it to kind of being an American. I'm not sure that's true or not, but we kind of have the idea we have to be either mean or nice, and they're incompatible. But I think there's a way to blend them, and you can say that you need to be kind of firm, but that you still care about your kids and you still love them. So the primary person who writes about this stuff, at least in English, is a guy named Hema Omer. He's written several books. This book on courageous parenting is his newest book. I haven't read this one. I haven't read the courageous parenting book, but I've read the other ones. Haim tries to write for general audiences and for parents, but he's not 100% successful. He's really, it really sounds like somebody who's a college professor trying to talk to people who aren't. But if you're really interested in this kind of approach, or you have it's appealing to you, or you have a child that you've been struggling with for a long time, there are lots of really interesting examples in his work, and he does talk. He gives lots of examples from his clinical practice and other kinds of settings. And his books, for the most part, they're 150 pages or so. So you're not stuck reading for weeks and weeks trying to get through here. His website down there, hanover.nbr.com. NBR stands for Nonviolent Resistance. That's a good example. The nbrspsy.com website, that's more for clinicians looking for training and things like that, but it does have some other information on this approach. And then if you do a YouTube search for nonviolent resistance parenting, there's an assortment of videos that describe kind of a lot of the principles kind of underlying this, and again, give some strategies and ideas. So I think that's all of my planned talk. So Josh, do we have questions?
All right. Yeah, as y'all think about questions, I'm also going to put a poll up that you can answer that will tell us what ages of children y'all have. Help us a little bit with doing question and answer. All are fast. That's awesome. Okay, we have 12. I think one person is on the phone, so that might be our max. And y'all can see the results. The largest age group is 6 to 10 years old, and then we've got child, so younger than that, and then a mix of toddlers, 11 to 13, 14 to 16, and 19 plus. Great, y'all. Thanks for sharing that.
And I think that age range is very informative, because I think one of the challenges is that we have a lot of research on a lot of ideas about parenting young children, and then there's another set of concerns about parenting teenagers, and that elementary school age range. Freud talked about that kind of as the lost the word, but kind of the time where nothing happens, essentially, and development, and there's still a little bit of that perspective out there. Just things are relatively calm and stable for the most part. The challenges as a parent are more day-to-day referee kinds of things, rather than the major concerns that you get on the other two ends. And so that's where kind of my research, a lot of it kind of started. We were trying to figure out, what's good for parents to do in terms of keeping aware of what's going on in their lives. And so I designed this research study based upon kind of what we thought at the time. This was about 20 years ago. What we thought parents should be doing, and we thought they should be asking their kids questions all the time, and really kind of being more intrusive into their lives. And when I would talk to parents, particularly the 6 to 11-year-old age range, the parents would tell me all the time, I don't need to do those things. So the parents were really kind of working from this vigilant care model of, like, I only get intrusive when I need to, and they were telling us they didn't need to a lot. But unfortunately, the parenting researchers were thinking, one size fits all strategies, and so if it's good for a parent of a 17-year-old to know what their kid's up to 24/7, then we should expect the same thing for the parents of a 10-year-old. Although for the most part, the parent of a 10-year-old pretty much knows where their kids are all the time because they're at home or school.
Yeah, you're actually getting at a couple of the questions. One of the questions was, what age group are you really thinking that this talk applies to?
Well, and again, I think the general idea, I think, can apply anywhere as a parent, about the kind of backing off and going in a little bit more, with a little bit more force, so to speak, when you're concerned. Again, it looks very different depending on the age of a child. Again, if you've got a toddler or preschooler around, then it's kind of be keeping your ears open to hear what they're doing and when they're kind of getting in trouble, or just keep an eye on them from across the room. By the time you get 6 to 10-year-old, they're probably gradually spending more time kind of outside of your visual field, and so that's where really we're thinking about, how do you transition to having a presence when you're not physically present. And so if you're having those conversations from 6 to 13, you're going to be present in their minds when they're 13 and up. And
Yeah.
so,
So we've got a real life example here for you. A 5-year-old who is climbing up on things to access candy, and they've resorted to locking the room where the candy's stored in the refrigerator overnight, and they're wondering, what sort of strategies you would recommend to implement this with that 5-year-old.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's great, because you've already done some of this stuff, right? Because you realize you're kind of up at that upper level of needing to take action. So I think there's potentially two issues here. One is kind of the safety issue of the child kind of climbing and doing those kinds of things. And then the second is the pursuit of candy. Right? And I think those are two different kinds of conversations to have. As far as kind of limiting the child's autonomy, so by locking them out, so to speak, you've kind of ramped up and cut it off from the parent's perspective. But the trick then, I think, is to think about, how do you reestablish that? How do you scale down that degree of restriction while giving the child some autonomy and some ability to make their own decisions. It's tricky because I don't know what your beliefs are and what your kind of level of comfort. I assume since you have candy in the house, you're not like, my kid can't have any candy, but you want them to be making good decisions and kind of reasonable kind of allocations of that. So I think that that's part of, and these pull in lots of other ideas, right? You're teaching your child self-control and other kind of strategies along with it. How do you have that conversation? How do you set up kind of those expectations? Probably, I think we're talking about the similar kinds of things, but we have to think about the child's level of ability to control their own behavior and to be able to communicate and things like that. So are there times of day where you want to give them access? That might be one way to kind of, and then you can just talk about the next time that the next, like you had your piece of candy for this afternoon, and then you get another piece after dinner tonight or tomorrow, or whatever the kind of the time frame is, rather than kind of that restrictive piece. But you're going to want to, again, keep those restrictions in until the child kind of has, you want to back them off in accordance with the child's behavior. So as the kid has a better ability to control their own behavior, that's where those restrictions should kind of back off.
So to follow up on that real quick, and then I'll ask you another question, a great question Tracy has. In a sort of applied way, are you saying that you should structure for the 5-year-old how the consequences feed back for the kid, rather than force the kid not to seek the candy? You just let the candy run out, or something like that? Like I'm trying to make this a little bit more concrete.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of a logical way to do it. But the tricky part is that if it's if mom likes the candy too, then you might go buy another bag at some point and kind of have to have the same issue over and over again, right? So I think that's a logical piece, and maybe when the candy runs out, that's where that strike when the iron's cold, kind of in that time where you're out of candy. That's where you have those conversations of like, oh, I'd really like to have a piece of candy today. And maybe next time when we get it, we'll eat one piece a day, and that'll help us kind of stretch it out.
Yeah.
And then later follow that up, and you can maybe come up with a kind of intermediate strategy so that the next time you buy the bag of candy, you only put half of it out, so that it runs out. You can kind of create a dosage where you run out more frequently and get the message across more frequently.
So I know Murray, and I'm sure his daughter is very smart, but I still think he can outsmart her. So the question from Tracy is, how do you continue with vigilant care to support your children's emotional well-being when everything they've ever known is not the same? For example, school and sports common routines.
Yep. So I will just kind of, before I directly answer, that Ham Elmer had written a new book on COVID-19 and supporting your kids in that way. I downloaded it the other day and took a read through it. He has one chapter that's specifically to that, and then he goes back into the stuff that he talks about all the time. But there is some work in this area that's very specific to our current kind of experiences. But I think it's taught. That's that everyday conversation stage, right? So it's not just that your child's life has changed, your life has changed. And so that's where I think the conversations about conversing with your child as a more of an equal, I know it's hard to not see your friends. I don't see my friends either. Doesn't mean that it doesn't matter for your child because you don't see your friends either. But this is something that it's a shared experience in this case. It can be also difficult because you're as a parent right now, I'm torn between my child wanting to do stuff with his friends and knowing how important social relationships are for a teenager, and also kind of wanting to keep him isolated and safe. So struggling to balance those kinds of things.
Following up to that, one of the things that I noticed is that you were very clear about don't try to control or force or coerce the kid. And so I thought you might differentiate those a little bit for us, but then like responding also here to what Tracy was saying, like when the kids are used to environments that use that, how do we really teach them in a different environment?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting perspective, right? Because a lot of times, the kids don't have a lot of freedom and choice, and then there's a learning curve, so to speak, when you're put into an environment where you do get to make your own choices and you're responsible for them. But the trick, I think, is to do it gradually in a limited way. And so when we talk with again, a lot of times when you talk about choice and things like that, we're thinking about younger children and preschoolers. And so you don't ask a preschooler what would you like to eat. You ask a preschooler, would you like this or would you like this? And so they have a choice, but between pre-approved parental options. And so I think that's part of how you can begin to expand that. But I think there's also the kind of flip side of realizing that our children are human and they make the same mistakes that we do. And so you take an adult who we're used to being at work from 8 to 5 or something like that, and now we're working from home, and we're kind of struggling with that freedom sometimes as well. And so why would it be different for our kids? Why should we expect them to be to be better people than we are in some respects like that?
So that's a good answer. Another question I was thinking about was, we're sort of talking about normal kids, right? But no kids are really normal, and they all have their different challenges. And what are some ways or what's some advice you could give to parents who are working around some specific types of challenges relating to their kids being atypical in some way? So, kids that might be autism spectrum disorder, or, who have ADHD, or, some of these types of challenges that are pretty common that could disrupt this process a bit.
Yeah, well, my general view is that everybody's kind of got their own uniqueness in some way, shape, or form. Some of it we have categories and names that apply to that, and sometimes those things are probably legitimately more challenging, but there are kind of variations on the theme. And I think this model of parenting is kind of on the idea that in that green area where you're kind of establishing those everyday interactions with your child, it's predicated on the uniqueness of your child and the situation that you're living in. And so if you have again, both autism and ADHD can, there's such wide variations within those disorders of what the day-to-day experiences are for those children and those parents. Maybe that you're cycling through more often, or that the concerns that you have are very specifically related to your child and disorders. But I think the fundamental ideas about there being a level of respect that your child deserves as a human being and as a person, I think that's fundamental. Now, again, figuring out how to work that into your life can be very different. But I think that's one of the things to for me to think about is what's the unique abilities and attributes that your child brings into the world, and how do you kind of structure your life and your expectations around that, and doing so in a realistic way. Just like we would make an analogy here. So your expectations as a parent, for the grades that your child makes in school. Well, not everybody's going to be able to make straight A's, and that can be a real challenge if that's your expectation as a parent. But everybody can put in some effort. Everybody can get their schoolwork done. So that there are places where we could expect that. And I think similar when we talk about kids with some kinds of disorders, there are some things that it's really, really challenging for them to do. And I think it's perfectly appropriate as a parent to kind of give them the flexibility in those areas, and it'll save you a lot of headache as well.
That's right. It'd be better for both, right? So we are really close to the end. It's actually 2:00 right now. Bobby, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. This has been really good information. I always know I'm encountering good ideas when my brain struggles a little bit to wrap itself around. And I didn't get to my helicopter parenting question, which I was waiting for. So we will post some information about nonviolent resistance parenting for you guys. That sounds really interesting. Thank you all for joining us. There are more of these talks coming up every month. There's going to be one in July talking about building better relationships. In August, we're going to talk about creative problem solving. In September, we're going to be talking about getting your best night's sleep with Dr. Pat Carter, who's going to be back with us. And then in October, we're going to talk about motivating yourself for life changes. And then in November, we're going to be back to sleep more and stress less month. So please join us for some of those. And I look forward to seeing y'all again. And again, Bobby, thank you. I'm sure we'll be pulling you back in to do some more stuff with us in the future. Bye, everybody. And thank you, Carolyn, as always, for coordinating all of this. All right. I'll see y'all soon.